Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to be starting a series of videos as we come closer to the Christmas holidays. There's obviously going to be a lot of purchasing, a lot of new items. There's a ton of things on the market now. A lot of them I've had the pleasure and ability to check out thanks to your support. And so today we're going to be talking about virtual reality versus 2D. I've tried out multiple virtual reality headsets over my time, ranging from Reverb to the Oculus to Pimax to Evo all the way up to the Varos. So stick around guys, because today hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions on whether or not you want to move, or someone you know would want to move, from 2D over to virtual reality. Stick around. If you are interested in acquiring any of my Overkill's tutorial guides for Microsoft Flight Simulator, or simply interested in supporting the channel, please consider joining us on Patreon. Patreon subscribers level tier 2 and above have access to all of my guides, as well as any future releases that come down the road. Patreon link can be found in the description below. All right, you guys, so let's get right into the video. First thing that you got to ask yourself when you're thinking about making the move into virtual reality is your peripherals. Now, up until recently, one of the handicaps to virtual reality was that your peripherals became a lot harder to use. Not impossible. People like myself, if you had a static cockpit and things like that that you were using every single day, you started to develop a pretty good muscle memory. Even for things like in DCS world, for example, the MFDs that are available from Thrustmaster or some custom made ones, or now the new WinWing setup, which is absolutely amazing, you would learn to sort of navigate your hands around and feel where you were pretty quickly. But if you're someone like myself and you're constantly swapping gear in and out, or you're constantly purchasing the new stuff, purchasing the new gear that comes out, that can make that a little bit more difficult and be quite frustrating. Now, we all know mixed reality is on the rise, but it's still in its infancy, much like virtual reality was when it first came out. Not many people made the dive into VR. VR had struggled extremely hard with performance issues and things like that. Well, now a lot of those developments have come down the road and have been ironed out, especially thanks to things like OpenXR. So when you start making the dive into virtual reality, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, how important is all of this? This is just some of the many items that I will be reviewing here on the channel over the coming weeks, hopefully helping you decide what to buy if you're just getting into it, or maybe an upgrade or two that you're going to be looking into. But so the big reason why I point this stuff out is because the more of these you have, the more difficult virtual reality can become. When you have something like this, turn you guys around for a minute. Keep going, there we go. Forgive the glare, guys, the light is right there. There we go. You guys can sort of get an idea of the standard cockpit there. So when you have something like that, it makes it a bit more difficult to figure out what you want to do. If you're going to be static, it makes it a lot easier, meaning that you're not going to be changing any of these peripherals. My cockpit is designed specifically around modularity. As a content creator, you guys know that I'm always reviewing new products, hardware, software, etc. on this channel. So I had to design mine in a way that was accustomed to the idea of swapping panels in and out, which is obviously going to change your muscle memory. So the first thing you have to ask yourself is, how much have you invested into your cockpits, right? And are you comfortable with things like this, with the idea of navigating them essentially blind? I'm not going to be focusing on mixed reality, guys, so I know that argument's going to come up a lot. It is still in its infancy. Right now, there are only 2 headsets that I'm aware of that really support it, and one of them being the Quest 3, which in my personal opinion, and I know many of you will share it if you've tried other VR headsets, the Quest 3 is great. It's a fun tool. It is not great for PC use. It's just not. The way that they have integrated that with the link cable, it really suffers from performance. Okay, it can't keep up with the direct connection headset devices such as Reverb, Reverb and Pimax, for example. Okay, so ask yourself first, how much is all of that worth to you? Because until mixed reality becomes a thing, and we will touch a little bit more on mixed reality here in a minute, but until mixed reality becomes a much more streamlined process and much more available, you're really going to be asking yourself is, can I find everything that I want while in the blind? Okay, so Next thing is we're going to be talking about screens, touch screens, all of the screens that you may have implemented or want to implement into your cockpit, glass gauges, things like this. Okay, if you guys are going to be wanting hardware like that, again, coming back into the fact that mixed reality isn't a thing yet, that makes that almost moot. Yes, I can adjust my altimeters, my headings, my vertical situation displays, whatever it may be, but the actual screens, which is usually where most of the money comes into play on that is, become pretty much useless, unfortunately. And the last step, the thing that I want you guys to think about is the keyboard. How good are you with the keyboard outside of being able to watch it? If you are someone who can comfortably type and not look at the keyboard, you are golden. You shouldn't have any issues as long as you can find your index points. But even then, it can be a little challenging, but it's something that gets over pretty quickly. Now, I do want to stress that when you get into virtual reality, if you do it enough, muscle memory does take into effect after some time, as long as you are not consistently changing the environment. Okay, so once you get it ironed out and you have all the hardware you want, it becomes actually quite easy over time. Okay, I got pretty darn quick in DCS world when I was an avid player and really dedicated a lot of time to it, of really getting quick on my throttles and controls and buttons and being able to hit my master arms and whatnot. Okay, so hardware aside now, let's talk about the pros and cons to VR versus 2D. Visually speaking. Visually speaking, in most situations, although this is becoming less and less of a concern, which is something that you want to think about, was fidelity or resolution of the image. It is not near the problem it used to be, especially if you have updated computer hardware. For example, I am right now running the 7900 X3D with the RTX 4080 and 64 gigs of DDR5 6000. And VR is running very, very well. Now, the one handicap that I would still like to mention that I still do get when running VR is limited by main thread, meaning that the CPU still can't quite keep up, but it is significantly better than what it was before, being, for example, my AMD Ryzen 9 3900 XT, which was unfortunately an aging processor. Would I also like to have a 4090? Absolutely. I think that would change the game dramatically as well. So be thinking about those kind of things. But with my current setup, and the complete list of my setup is down in the description below if you guys want to check that out. I can easily, in most situations, Microsoft Flight Simulator on high or ultra settings with a few things adjusted, I can easily hit above 60 frames per second, which in VR, to give you guys an idea, your target is 45 frames per second. Now, if you have not ever purchased VR before, do not go looking at your monitors and saying, ooh, my FPS is 120 frames per second, I can do that. No, you can't. Okay, I can guarantee if you were hitting 120 frames per second on your monitor, you are likely going to be somewhere down into the maybe low 40s, maybe even high 30s once you get into virtual reality. Virtual reality requires a ton of hardware and processing ability and really is a huge demand on your gaming experience. Now, with that coming in back in display, it comes back to where this all began with virtual reality. As long as you're willing to sacrifice certain settings and maybe not have the images clear, I can promise you that the experience is still better in 2D from my perspective. Once you go virtual reality, you don't go back. It is very rare that you go back. I switch back and forth for content creation purposes, but I can tell you right now that every opportunity that I have, even in American Truck Simulator, I am using virtual reality. The things that virtual reality gives you, the benefits that it provides over a high fidelity resolution, even back in the old days when I wasn't able to crank the images up, the depth perception alone, especially for flight simulation, was like gold in your hands. It will be an experience like none other. If you are also somebody who finds yourself, coming back to this for a second, getting sick, maybe you've tried VR and you found you were getting nauseous, I can promise you that in most cases that actually goes away over time. And the other thing to check is to make sure that your FPS, again, is above, on average, 45 frames per second. Most common cause of nausea or getting sick while in virtual reality is an unstable frame rate or instable frame rate. And essentially what happens is in VR, if you turn your head and the VR is not right there with you, for example, if it lags, your brain doesn't understand that because it knows that as you are turning your head, that image is supposed to be following you. And so if it lags and you get poor frame rates or you get stuttering, what can happen is your brain starts to not understand what's happening and it makes you nauseous. The other thing that I will tell people who do love VR but still find themselves getting a little bit sick in the belly here, anti-nausea medicine. Any anti-nausea medicine or motion sickness medicine, that's essentially what it is. That's what you guys have to think about, is essentially what you are feeling is motion sickness. So any motion sickness medication can help alleviate those symptoms if you are just diehard, I want to be in virtual reality. And as I stated previously, in most situations that nausea subsides over time as you get used to it. So think about that. So going back to the pros of virtual reality. Again, the depth perception alone is just, it's gold. It's gold in your hands, especially when flying in formation, perfecting your landings. Maybe you're in air combat and you're doing some sort of air-to-air simulations where you are doing, air-to-air refueling. It's gold. It's absolutely gold. Flying across the treetops at 500 knots in an F-18, scraping the top of the trees is an amazing experience in virtual reality. And that's why we're going to talk about the different types of headsets in just a minute, and why I still and will always recommend Pimax as of the time of this video. So we'll get there in just a second here. The next thing is just situational awareness in general. It is so much easier to be able to turn your head, and it feels so much more natural. I know we have track IR, and so we'll talk about that. But it's so much more natural to be able to turn your head without looking at the screen like I'm doing with you guys right now. This is how track IR works for those of you who don't know. You usually have some sort of head tracking system. There is now Beam Eye Tracker that I use most commonly now that provides a head tracking solution. But the trick is that as I'm watching you, I turn my head, you are my monitor. I have to keep my eyes on the screen to see what I'm doing. So it's one of these numbers that a lot of people also have trouble getting used to that, because it's really weird for them to turn their head and see the camera move while they're staring at the screen. So that can be a discomforting feeling as well for some. But the situational awareness provided in virtual reality by having that natural rotation. If I want to look down, I look down. If I want to look up, I look up. And then the intensity that it can create, especially when you are in a dogfight situation doing something like DCS, and you're whipping your head back and forth, it can greatly, something as simple as that sounds, having to do this, okay, to find your opponent or find your target or whatever it may be, you would not believe how much that increases the immersive experience that is provided through virtual reality. So finally, now let's get into the pros of 2D. Well, with 2D, obviously, as we talked before, you have all of your panels, all of your switches, all of your screens, especially going back to DCS for a second, your combat. If you have MFDs with the screens, being able to look at that screen and identify your target using your zooming, you're literally doing something like this with your flight stick, you're finding your target, you're rifling your Maverick, and then you're coming back up and looking out the window. That is one of the great advantages. Now, you can do that in VR, obviously, as well. But it's different when there is a different immersive experience also, for example, even with something like this. When I had this over on the top shelf of the cockpit you guys saw earlier where the FCP is, I had my cockpit, or I had the camera view set up so I could just see the top of the glare shield, right? And then this was directly below my monitor. And it was also a completely different type of immersion, seeing all of my gauges live right here and adjusting them as I would in the real aircraft, adjusting my altimeter, whatever it may be. That was also an incredible experience. So there are tons of 2D environment enhancing effects that absolutely can bring 2D a little bit above virtual reality. It all depends on what type of experience you are looking for. And that's why I want you guys to really think about it before you take the dive into VR. Is that, again, all of the different components and MCDUs and FCPs and all the great things that come down the line can really change the game. Also, triple monitors can be a very fun setup, especially if you have very large screens. If you can set yourself up in almost a box of monitors, say monitor here, here, and in front of you. Now, when you go that route, they need to be large screens. Usually people are using anywhere from 40 to 50-inch TVs. Okay, and TVs are also, by the way, not a bad replacement for monitors so much anymore. It used to be a big deal. TVs did not have the refresh rate that monitors do, and they had a lot more latency. That is not so much the case anymore. So be thinking about that too as you were deciding how to upgrade your sim rig or get into the simulation experience yourself. So now let's talk about mixed reality. Okay, mixed reality is definitely a very amazing experience. I had the opportunity to test it out at a friend's house in the Quest 3 not too long ago. Now, as cool as the experience was, as I said, this is where I'm getting my opinion that the Quest 3 is just not ready for PC experience, in my personal opinion. Now, I know there are many of you that are having a great time with the Quest 3, and that is a wonderful thing. I am not trying to shoot that down. but I know for a fact, and seeing the hardware and the rig that was being used is definitely top tier, blows mine out of the water, and things were still having to be sacrificed in order to maintain the high FPS that was necessary in order, in my opinion, to truly enjoy virtual reality. So even on a high tier machine under the Quest 3, a lot of visual fidelity was lost. Okay, and so that was just something that I noticed. Now maybe everyone's experience differs. We all know how computers work. One thing doesn't necessarily associate to the other. But with mixed reality, there are multiple headsets that are starting to develop it. Now, obviously you have the Varo X or EX series. We're not going to talk about those right now because they're a $4,000 headset, if I'm not mistaken. So really where that gets us back to right now is the only other ones on the market that's rocking the same thing that I'm aware of. The really ones who are really pushing for it is Pimax. Pimax, once again, you guys, so for example, this is the Pimax Crystal Lite, and it is an absolutely fabulous headset. This thing is both comfortable, it's lightweight, has a wide field of view, has a high fidelity lenses, is very easy to set up and configure, especially in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Excuse me one second. I'll have to remember, hopefully, to edit that out. But anyways, it's a fantastic entry point into virtual reality. If you are looking for PC VR, that is the kicker between this and the Oculus. A lot of people say, no, Oculus is still the best entry level. I disagree. It depends on what you're doing. If you are looking for PC only, sitting PC only, and not even sitting, this actually has standing capability. You're just wired. Right, so as long, I mean, this is a long cable. My computer is probably, the back of my computer is probably 8 feet away from me right now, easily. So keep that in mind. But it has inside-out tracking, which means it doesn't require the use of any base station. I've used it in both light and dark situations, and for the most part, have never had an issue. There was one night where I had a couple of issues with the tracking if I turned my head too far away from the screen, but for the most part, the light illuminating from the computer monitor itself was giving the tracking enough light to do its job. And this thing comes in, if I remember correctly, right around $700 US. Obviously, you have tax, things like that come into play. There's also a big promotion with both DCS World and Microsoft Flight Simulator. I believe right now, if you buy the Crystal Lite, you get a copy of the standard edition of Microsoft Flight Simulator, and DCS World, you get a ridiculous amount of DC miles, which you can use to purchase a new aircraft. Okay, so keep that in mind. But in my personal opinion, the Pimax Crystal Lite right now is the best entry-level VR. It has all the bells and whistles necessary to get you up and running. There's also a comfort strap that I will be doing a review on. I didn't want to put that in here because it doesn't come stock with it, so I took that off for the sake of this video, but it has a comfort strap that also comes over the top if you want that extra reinforcement. But honestly, for the most part with the Lite, I haven't had an issue. Now, the OG Crystal was a lot bigger and heavier, and this had the battery pack in the back. The comfort strap was a necessity. But now getting into that, what Pimax is starting to do, and we heard a little bit about it shortly after Flight Sim 2024, is they are developing a mixed reality faceplate. Okay, so bringing this back over for a second, this faceplate can be removed. Okay, we can pop that off and replace it with something different. So as mixed reality becomes more and more of a thing, and we'll come back to that in just a second as far as the faceplate, but as mixed reality becomes more and more of a thing, you will still be able to upgrade your Pimax to support mixed reality later on. And that's one of the other things that I really enjoy about the Pimax headsets is they're very modular. You can even change out the lenses. One of the things that they had available for the OG Crystal was a wide field of view lenses that gave you the same field of view that came with the 8KX, which is, I think they said it was 120 degrees. It came out to like 112, something like that. It wasn't quite 120, which is normal. You know, everyone boasts that, but it's not quite there. Now, why is wide field of view important? And this is the reason why I stay with Pimax. This is what drew me to Pimax from the get-go, was the wider field of view lenses. What drove me to that is in flight simulation especially, or racing simulation if that's your thing as well, is the peripheral vision. You get your sense of motion and speed, more specifically your sense of speed, from your peripheral vision, things going past the sides of your eyes. Okay, and so the wider field of view lenses allowed you to come back to here, and you could actually see the motion going back here and gave you a really strong sense of speed, which for Microsoft Flight Simulator, if you're doing any kind of aerobatic or low-level flying, was absolutely awesome, especially during the takeoffs and landings. DCS World, there's no need to even mention it. You guys, if you know, you know. You know what I'm saying? So it really helps a lot, especially if you're doing also other cool things like, again, as we aforementioned, flying in formation. It makes it a lot easier to monitor your gauges and things like that while being able to simply look over and see your wingman or your flight partner. So guys, those are my big tips and tricks or tips in regards to purchasing VR or staying with 2D. So to sum it all up, plan your environment. How deep are you wanting to go? How good are you with the muscle memory? Are you willing to learn in the blind? How good is your hardware? Is your hardware computer up to the specs required in order to truly maintain a good virtual reality experience so you don't feel that buyer's remorse when you get it plugged in and you realize that your computer is too underpowered in order to give you a good experience? The headset, if you drop $700-800 or even more on a good VR headset and bring it home to find out that your computer can't give you the optimum performance that the headset's capable of, it's pretty heartbreaking. Been there, done that. Okay, and of course the upgrades required are just as expensive as the headset, if not more, depending on the scenario. So, and then finally moving into what kind of experience are you looking for inside the sim itself? Are you looking into mixed reality? Are you going to be okay with mixed reality? Or are you looking for is the depth perception and the field of views and just the natural being able to rotate your head and look around, having that situational awareness and that escape from reality, if you will, more important than all the bells and whistles you have on your system? I hope this video has given you guys something to think about. Again, I truly stand by Pimax. And before we get too far into that, I know that people are, every video, it never fails, somebody calls me a fanboy. I am a fanboy, but how do you become a fanboy? You become a fanboy by purchasing a product and realizing how great it is. I want it to be very clear in every one of these videos that I do with Pimax is that I have purchased and owned and operated every single release that Pimax has ever put out since the beginning of their product line. The first device that Pimax ever actually provided to me was the Pimax Crystal. So everything all the way up into the 8KX I purchased myself. So I have been through the trials and pains with Pimax, and one of the things I used to say is that they tend to launch things a little too early, and I will still stand by that. Although this last release with the light seemed to go pretty well, but even then on launch day it had a couple of issues that needed to be addressed pretty quickly. But some of that is also normal and part of development. So keep that in mind, guys. As always, I'd love to hear your tips, tricks, comments, and thoughts on all of the above below. And I'm sure other readers would like to see your comments as well. So if you have difference of opinion, just support it with your thoughts and give people something else to think about. One of the things that I always like to stress as my last point here is that I did not grow up with money. I did not grow up with a lot of money, you guys. I've had to fight my way all the way through up. I'm a single father of 3 right now, basically working 3 jobs. So I understand the importance of the dime and the nickel. So the reason why I make these videos is to make sure that people don't go diving into things that maybe they don't want to do. Maybe you're really excited about VR, but some of the things that I've told you have swayed you away from VR. I would prefer that than you waste your money. Okay, so as always, I'm just trying to look out for all of you guys and want everyone to have an absolutely wonderful holiday season as the Christmas holidays is on its way around. And do make sure, although we take care of Thanksgiving first, and be thankful for all of those who are around you and support your days. And I cannot stress enough how grateful and thankful I am for all of you. As always, guys, stay safe and healthy. I'll see you in the next one.